listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 102 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and joining me today is Jess Bunyard. Jess is the editor at Women's Rugby Coaching Magazine and head of women's and girls rugby at Huddersfield in the UK. She is a level 2 RFU coach, has guest coached men's teams, previously coached Yorkshire U18s, and it's a pleasure to have her on the show. So welcome, Jess.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Pleasure. And I've seen what you've been doing with the women's coaching magazine, women's rugby coaching magazine. So I was excited about that and thought it'd be great to get you on for a chat. So happy you could join us.
Yeah, we're actually coming up to our first anniversary of it. So we first published in Feb last year. So it's come around really fast this first year, but it's been amazing. And I've learned so much and connecting with so many great people doing wondrous stuff in the women and girls games. It's been amazing so far.
Awesome. All right. Can't wait to get into it. And what about you as a rugby player? How'd you get involved? What was the spark and how was your experiences?
So the spark to play was always there, but because the growth in the women and girls game wasn't like as amazing as it is now, I didn't get the chance to play until university. Right. So I had to sit and watch and be a spectator up until I went to uni. So I quite famously, we're Leicester Tigers supporters as my family. So my dad used to take me every weekend. And quite famously as a kid, I'd have my nappy changed on the wooden benches of the stand because the game was on, and he didn't want to go to the toilet to do the baby changing stuff. So the spark to play was always there, but it wasn't until uni when I finally put on some boots and finally got out to play. And it was kind of everything I imagined and hoped it would be. And I was a prop forward, which I absolutely loved. Scrums were like the bread and butter, and I absolutely loved them. If you were telling me that we were going to do an hour and a half of scrum tech for the entire session, I'd be happy. No fitness, just scrummaging for me, please. And that's what I loved.
Cool. And what about coaching? How'd you first get involved to coaching?
Oddly, I got spotted at a gym. So I went to university, did my degrees, came back here to Huddersfield to live with my parents. But I loved the team that I started playing for in London that much. So I used to kind of travel every weekend and just hop on a train and go and play for them. It was a chance to see my mates again. Yeah. So I'd end up sleeping on one of their sofas or sleeping on one of their floors and just playing with them on the Sunday and then catching a train back up. And I was working in art at the time, so I'd go and see a couple of art shows and actually do some work for a living while I was there for the weekend. But I'd come up here to train, so I'd just hit the gym and try and be, get a little bit of work done in the gym as I possibly could to prep for the weekend of playing. And a guy at a local gym spotted me in my rugby union kit and said, "Have you thought about playing locally?" And I went, "Well, actually, I've managed to coach a couple of sessions when the coach couldn't turn up for the team I was playing for." And I was like, well, I'll just run some passing stuff or I'll just do something. And I was really interested in developing the coaching and learn how to do more of that. So I said, actually, I don't want to play. I'm probably really interested in coaching. So I went down Monday night to the local club here, to the university women's side that we're training. And I got stuck in, and within the first couple of weeks, I was an assistant coach, going to their games, running elements of training, and basically being their sort of number one match support because the head coach couldn't go on match days because it was during the week. And so I was thoroughly thrown in at the deep end.
Often the best way. What were some of your memories from that experience that were good things and things that kind of made you realize how difficult coaching can be?
I think one of the best memories for me is being included and incorporated on the uni team's match day sort of rituals. So if you're going on the away bus for the first time, on the way back, you've got to sing a song, and you got to sing a couple of lines yourself before everybody, tunes in and starts doing with you. And I find that immensely humiliating, to be honest. I'm like, I wasn't, I'm not the best singer, so having to stand up and do that. But there were a couple of freshers at the time were doing it, and I felt really included in their rituals. And that was really impactful for me, just how actually I have made a difference. You guys are seeing me and incorporating me into your team. And that was really powerful for me. And then the kind of big learning moment, if I look back at it now, I was way too emotionally invested in those first games on the sideline, because obviously I'm still playing in London, and I think a coach just like stands and shouts on the sideline, right? So all that passion I have that I play on Sunday, I can just stand there on the sideline and I'll just like exude this passion through verbalizing, and the message will get across to the players.
And they'll do it.
And I tell you, it was so tiring afterwards. I used to come home and I'd be knackered, because I'd be just shouting and walking up and down the touchline and running up and down the touchline at the pace of the game for like the entire fixture. And that is, let me tell you, that is not the way to coach.
For sure. Cool. Yeah, I think that's a very common theme and thread across a lot of the coaches that I've talked to. And I was definitely in that boat as well. I started my coaching as a player coach. So I was on the field trying to manage my mental state at the same time as trying to be a coach, and all the other things that you think you can do in real time, but actually you can't do any of it. So yeah, it's a good learning moment when you realize, okay, you know what, I've just got to take a big step backwards here.
Yeah, it's just relaxing and taking a breath. And I don't know what I was thinking at the time. Because I remember some of my coaches just used to sort of stand on the sidelines and they'd give words of encouragement. So I don't know what I thought I was doing, running along the sideline trying to keep up with the pace of the game. And I don't know if I was like, I don't know what I thought I was doing, like embodying it and like being this sort of 16th person running up and down the sidelines, but it was exhausting and really wasn't very productive at all. I think it took me about like a month and a half to just sort of like calm down and realize like this wasn't the way. And then I was kind of thankful to like the RFU coach developers at the time, the local community coaches, just sort of going, have you considered this way? Have you considered that way? And just kind of helping me on that journey. But yeah, it was not productive at all. I think you kind of soon realize that it takes a different energy and a different focus to become a coach. You can't transfer the energies that you might have had as a player and just assume it'll be as effective as a coach.
Yeah, no, 100%. And you mentioned the RFU and your process through your level 2 and getting support there. And have you moved on to your level 3 process now? And how are things going in your own personal coach development?
Yeah, I'm started doing the level 3 this year, so I'm about the halfway point now.
Awesome.
And it's really interesting. It's challenges you. Obviously, no learning experience should want to keep you in the safe zone or a comfort zone that you've kind of become accustomed to, and it challenges you to kind of to look inward a little bit first and to look at knowing yourself as a coach, and make sure you know your process and why you do your process, and then it will kind of challenge you to add other things into that process, which is really good. And I've got a great bunch of players to be doing it with. Although we're a brand new team, they're keen and they just kind of go with the flow with any kind of crazy ideas I'm working on.
Yeah, that's a bonus when you got a supportive group that lets you experiment and they know that you've got their best interests at heart, and that's really important. And with regards to your own personal coaching, what's your favorite part of the game to coach, and how would you design a session to deliver that?
It would be really obvious for me to sit here as an ex-prop forward and to say the scrum is the thing that I love to coach. It is one of the favorite things I love to coach because it's something I'm really passionate about, and obviously I'm really comfortable in knowing the technical intricacies of it. And I think when you're coaching development women's, people arrive in the sport and they don't necessarily have a concept of how strong you actually are as an individual. And so if you get your technique right in the scrum, if you're scrummaging against somebody who's a similar size to you, obviously we don't want to create a mismatch or anything, but I could have somebody who might be an out and out winger scrummaging against another winger just for technique and practice, and they discover what their inner power is and how actually if they work together they can hold each other up and really work together. And you can see that spark lit in somebody then who doesn't realize actually how strong they are, that they have this inner strength. So I love coaching that aspect of the game. But I probably, when I'm in the craft and I'm in the moment, I love coaching games. I love possibly rocking up with little or no session plan. Those are the days that can challenge you the most. To challenge yourself rocking up with no session plan, put a couple of games in, see what the players are struggling with, see what they need support on, and then adapt the rules and think on your feet and go from there. And I love those kinds of sessions. I love it because they're co-created with the players. So the players are chucking the rules in, you're chucking rules in. It's all based on what you're noticing and observing, which can be a challenge as a coach. It can be really easy sometimes to rely on a piece of paper that says we're working on this and we're working on that today, and then we've got to move here at a set time. And I think sometimes it's important to have sessions like that.
Yeah.
But I think just sometimes standing away from the piece of paper and looking up at your players and having a session with no session plan can be quite challenging. And I just love the coaching of games, to be honest. It's where you see players' confidence really soar.
Yeah, that's that. I'm all over that as well, and that's a big part of my sessions. And yeah, I probably have made that mistake as well, where I'm pretty forthright in terms of like, we're only doing games, we're not doing any breakouts or anything like that. And then you actually realize, okay, now I've got to peel it back a bit, and we've got to slow things down. And that's where I think I lean pretty heavily on the whole model, where that middle part is, you know, it might only be 5 minutes. And usually with me, it's only 5 minutes of drills. And then other side of that is, you know, 30, 40 minutes either side of that of games with modified rules and those kind of things. And especially with new players, if they're brand new to the game or relatively young, they don't know what they don't know. So they need to find out those solutions by themselves and with their teammates in game settings.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think players, or certainly the group of players I'm working with, work really well through a process of self-discovery. So I'll put them in a game, and at some point I'll chuck little puzzle pieces that might look like a game of rugby union in there, and they have to connect those puzzle pieces together, and they'll learn loads by the end of the session. You know, it may not always look instantly like a game of rugby, but there'll be lots of puzzle pieces in there that will ultimately help them get better at the sport. And that's the kind of stuff I love creating the best.
What's an example of something you've done recently?
So I did a new game on Tuesday, actually, which probably looks a little bit more like rugby, but you split the pitch into 3 zones, and you sort of, instead of putting constraints on the attackers, you put some constraints on the defenders. So you've got them all in the first zone. Defenders can move anywhere they want in that zone. Once they've made a touch, they're then banished to the second zone. Likewise, they're in the second zone, but they can still move anywhere they want to in the second zone. If they make a touch in that second zone, they're then banished to the third and final zone. Attackers have to make it all the way through the 3 zones and to score on the other side. So there's various ways of doing that. Obviously, the simple one is, how can you do it without actually making a touch to push the defenders back? If you kick straight over, defenders can't touch you and they're stuck in zone 1. But equally, each time you make a touch, the picture that is presented to the attackers changes, because the defenders will have to move backfield. So it's quite fun. And it worked with my guys, particularly in defence, at just getting them to just hammer home that process of, you've got to go forward and make a touch, otherwise you're out the game. No,
I like that, and puts them into situations where they've overloaded the attack in defence, or vice versa. The attackers overloaded them big time, and they have to have some traffic moving towards them that they have to solve a fast evolving problem.
Yeah, 100%. Any game that has a changing picture for either defenders or attackers is ultimately going to be good, because the real 15-a-side game is lots of changing pictures all at once. So anything we can have as a mini puzzle piece that's a changing picture in a training session is going to be the best for them and more game realistic. Yeah,
awesome. I saw on Twitter recently that you put a call out to some clubs around your local area where you're asking for some guest coaching opportunities. I thought that was pretty awesome. What was some of the feedback there? What was some of the take up and the experiences like from that?
Yeah, so there's been one take up so far because I think I put it out and then the pandemic hit and we went in the multiple lockdowns and stuff like that. But I went to the other side of Leeds, which isn't that far away from me, to guest coach a men's side there, and they were really open to the whole experience. So they had their regular coaches and then myself, and we ran a bit of a circuit session.
Right.
So the other two coaches ran a station each, and then I ran like a main game station, or with kind of a theme in mind. And I was kind of really impressed about how the players just took themselves in, because it can be a little bit intimidating if you're the only female coach in an environment going to coach a men's team that you don't know. So ultimately you've got to familiarize yourself with them, know what makes the players work so that you can adapt the game whilst being a female coach and trying to just get over that little bit of like imposter syndrome that can happen. But they chucked themselves in, and it was a real test of, okay, well, I know nothing about these players, and I'm crafting a game for them based on how they play right in front of me. So it was a real test of my noticing skills and how quickly I can spot stuff and where they need challenge, where they need support. So it was a real good learning experience for me.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it's pretty brave too to just like put your hand up and say, you know what, I'm really gonna test myself here, and that whole imposter syndrome, that's real. Like that's a real thing, and I think you highlight it, well, that female coaches may experience that a lot more than male coaches do in that environment, or in any environment.
Yeah, I have to say it's definitely striking me at the moment with the level 3. I haven't met another female coach who's doing their level 3 sort of in my local area at the moment. I think there might be another
that's a
one down
problem within
south,
itself, right there.
Massively.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of sat there, and the level 3 is a big step, and you kind of enter the room for the first time and you don't see really anyone. I mean, there's a female coach developer who's kind of helping you with the course and stuff, so she's in the room, but in terms of actual students sitting and doing the course, there's nobody that looks like you, which can be, is a thing. You pat yourself on the back, you've made it, you're here, you're on the course, look at the kind of step you're taking. But equally, it's 2022 and I shouldn't be the only female student in the room.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think that's a challenge. That's a challenge worldwide, and some countries are doing a better job than others, and I think it just needs to keep pushing forward. And I can't speak more highly for working with female coaches and being an assistant coach to a female coach and working in a women's environment. It just makes you a better coach, and it makes the game better as well. So I think it's a must.
Yeah, 100%. And I think my experience is, because women possibly, or certainly in the environments I've coached, they're newer to the sport. So they will ask more questions. They'll want to find out the why of we're doing stuff, because they just simply don't know. They may not have seen rugby before on the TV. They may not have picked up a rugby ball before. So they'll want to ask more questions, which means as a coach, you've kind of got to have answers, either that directly answer them, or you've got to have ways that will stimulate the conversation to aid their learning. So you've got to kind of know your stuff as a coach. Whereas if you're coaching male players who have played the game all their life, they might grasp the puzzle pieces a little quicker, and they might not want to ask further questions, but that in itself could be a challenge. Well, how do you get to them to arrive at the learning point if they're not asking any questions? So both probably present challenges, but I find coaching women's more, you got to know the why pretty quickly, because they'll want to know and they'll want to ask questions.
For sure. Cool. All right. So I mentioned in the introduction, you're the editor at Women's Rugby Coaching Magazine. How did this role come about, and the magazine itself, and what was the evolution of this concept to begin with?
Yeah, so about 14 months ago, Dan Cotterill at Rugby Coach Weekly approached me and said that they were looking into producing a monthly PDF magazine for women and girls rugby, just to help grow the games and grow a community and support the community of coaches who are kind of learning at a grassroots level, on the ground level, every week about how to grow women and girls rugby. And I was kind of instantly interested. As we mentioned before, it can be tricky if you look in an environment, you don't see an awful lot of people like you. There aren't many female coaches out there working within the men's or the women's game. And so one of the first things I said to Dan was, yes, I want to support coaches, male or female, working in the women and girls game, but I also want to shine a light and support female coaches who are working in either men's or women's rugby, and it's really important we focus on that, and we look at S&Cs and physios and all of the stuff that doesn't necessarily get shone a light on, and we help bring that education to grassroots coaches. So there could be a male coach out there who's going, I don't know, how do I talk about periods? Should I talk about periods? How do I talk about sports bras? Should I even talk about sports bras? And so I was really keen to kind of shine a light on that stuff and educate coaches. And one of the first pieces we did was on sports bras, and how actually talking to male coaches and making sure that they know that women don't know a lot about sports bras either. We don't know how to get the right fit for us. And I spoke to a researcher who's actually gone out there and done research, and 9 times out of 10 women are wearing the wrong fit of sports bra, or generally wearing the wrong fit of bra, and actually that can reduce your stride because you're not feeling comfortable. So actually your running times and stuff like that is slower because you're not as comfortable, so your stride is shorter. And it was great to chat to her, and so we kind of produced a resource that was like, here's who you can hand this up in your changing room. So male coaches or female coaches, you don't have to have any awkward conversations, but at the same time, put this poster up in your changing room. It'll educate your players, and we can treat it just like any other piece of really important equipment. You wouldn't go out and play rugby without a gum shield or without your studs in your boots. So we shouldn't go out there and play without proper fitting sports bras.
No, 100%. And it's one of those things that, you know, as a male coach coming in, you having that conversation is especially if you don't have daughters, or you're single, or, you know, whatever environment you come from, it may be like the scariest concept you could ever consider would be to have that conversation. But if you have a resource there that's, you know, fairly easy to pass on and help support you, and does probably most of the legwork, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. And it's about just saying that these sorts of things are okay, but as well as talking about a sort of health and rugby topics, so stuff like periods, sports bras, menopause was another one that we dealt with. We just generally talk about how to grow the game. So if you wanted to start a women and girls team or a women and girls section at your club, what are the potential pitfalls? Is there a right way? Is there a wrong way? If I'm running a taster session for women who have never picked up a rugby ball before, how do I go about it? What kind of language do I use? And because actually that can be a common pitfall for coaches. Is their language use. We have so much jargon in this sport, and half the time we use it, we're not even aware that we're using it. So stuff like a touch tackle, like what does that mean? Stuff like a turnover, what does that mean? And these can all be stuff that we think actually we're not using jargon. I'm not using stuff like scrum or line out or, you know, rucks and mauls and breakdown and stuff like that, you know, wing 3/4, old phrases like that. I'm not using that kind of jargon, but actually it still is jargon. So we need to kind of look at creating an awareness in ourselves when we're saying things, that it's as simple as and as easy as possible. And if I've used jargon and a player isn't aware, just check for understanding. So it can be really simple stuff like that we cover as well.
Yeah. That reminds me of one session I coached about 5 years ago, where it was all about offloading. And 5 minutes into it, one kid puts his hand up and says, "Oh, what's an offload?" I realized that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I probably should have worked through that before actually going straight into this situation. So yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that doesn't seem obvious, because we occupy the world of rugby 24/7. So we're just in it. And so it can be really difficult for us to poke our head above the parapet and actually take a step back and go, actually that word doesn't make sense outside of our lexicon. It has no frame of reference for anybody who's never seen the sport before, or who picked it up once in school, or who's only ever played netball. So it can be a real challenge for coaches. But I think looking at how we use language in our sessions and who we're using the language for, I think has 100% made me a better coach.
Yeah. Awesome. Happy New Year, coaches. Hoping that 2022 offers some great opportunities for you in terms of growth, development, and ultimately success as a coach. I've set myself a goal this year, and I'm going to tell you about it right now. I'm deep into the process of creating an online course based on what I've learned from running this podcast for over 6 years and 100 plus episodes. And my goal is to release that online course this year. I've gone through the most popular and downloaded episodes to dig up the coaching gold nuggets to share with everyone. The title of the course is Evolve Rugby, and it's going to be big. 6 modules, 26 chapters, worksheets, reflective journaling, transformative information, all from the comfort of your own home. Filming has already started, so stay tuned for updates and release dates. But for now, kick back and enjoy this episode. Yeah, no, so it kind of leapfrogs into some of the questions I had for you about, some of the topics have just been really unique for, like, as a male coach who's done most of my coaching in the men's setting, but having concepts brought up, like the one that you recently talked about was having kit made for women rugby players. I just think that's so key and so important, and that, if a rugby club values women's rugby, they should value it at the same level as they value their men's side, and that means from everything, from training time and attention from physios and all those kind of things, right down to what kind of kit they're getting. Are they just getting a men's cut that's, here you go, that'll do? Or is there actually some attention to that detail? Because it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking back to my playing days, I was always in men's kit 100%. Now, sometimes that fits you really well and you're lucky. Other times you can be unsure of like what measurements to use. So I remember once we were getting shorts, but they were men's shorts kitted out for us. So we all had to sort of like queue up to get the tape measured to make sure it was accurate, which is kind of a thing in itself, because, no one really wants to queue up, even if it was getting measured by another teammate, no one really wants to queue up and have their measurement, read and then wrote down on a piece of paper. But we didn't know what men's sizes we were, because obviously we're like sizes 16 or 18 or 20 or something like that, or I know I'm roughly like an extra large or something like that. And that in itself can be quite an odd and unsettling experience. And then I remember getting the shorts, and then I've still got to like squeeze myself into the shorts, even though they're supposed to fit me, because the cut is meant for a bloke, it's not meant for me. And let's be honest, like, my hips are different to men's hips, women's hips are different. So how am I supposed to squeeze myself into a pair of shorts? And then when we look at the shirts are, there's times where you can go for a baggy shirt. That's great. So, I was often more comfortable in a baggy shirt than I was in a properly fit shirt. That's just my preference. But if I've got somebody who's can only wear that size shirt because that's all we can pull out the bag for her on match day, we're often like, I remember like trying to pull the shirt over her to get it to fit her, and then it usually takes like 2 or 3 people to get the shirt over again, simply because we're just built differently. So it can be a struggle. So what's a tight fit for a bloke is going to be an exceptionally tight fit for a woman, especially around the chest area.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it just goes to my earlier point that it's a value thing, and that it's recognition of the importance of the players and the team itself, that you're making these decisions and these thoughts, and often it's probably just like oversight, for the most part, and that most clubs are run by volunteers, and these kind of things happen. But it's great that you're bringing awareness to it, so that people can say, what, there are other ways to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really interesting in our article, we spoke to Steph Evans from Rugby. And one of the things she raised awareness of that most sort of clubs and volunteers didn't know, and I certainly didn't know, is often we think we're tied into a supplier contract, but actually we have to give that supplier first right of refusal, which means that if they don't offer kit that fits your women's team or that is women's kit, then you can go somewhere else. But as long as you offer that opportunity to them first, you could go somewhere else. Now, obviously, check your individual contracts at whatever club you're in, because it may differ. But that was one of the bits of advice that she had that I think is incredibly useful for clubs. Check your contract. If you can offer your supplier then first right of refusal, if they don't offer tailor-made women's kit, then you have the right to go somewhere else.
Yeah, no, that's a good call. One of the other issues you brought up, and this one speaks to me too, because my wife returned to play after pregnancy as well, and so it was great to see a conversation around that. What were some of the things that came up in that article about female players returning to play after giving birth?
Yeah, it was really interesting to hear actually how a club coach had managed it whilst the player was pregnant, and then obviously upon their return. So when the player was pregnant, they continued to just do a little bit of a touch activities. Obviously, with 100% approval of the midwife and the doctors and everybody on board of that, because the priority is that mum and baby are absolutely safe. But they continued to do some little touch stuff. They worked on some skill stuff. And then when it was time for them to step away, they didn't remove themselves completely from that environment. So they still had their support network. Because actually becoming a mum, becoming a parent is like a life-changing experience for somebody. So your entire kind of world changes overnight. And what we don't want to happen is that players who are pregnant suddenly find themselves without that rugby family support network because they don't see their team for the whole time during pregnancy or for the latter stages of pregnancy. And then managing that return, it just comes down simply to when that player is comfortable. So when they're comfortable and you can have chats around what training might look like for them. And as coaches, we have to be flexible. That has to be modified. Obviously, they are not going to come back and want to go in full pelt into tackling people. They're going to be a little scared. They're going to be a little unsure. So we'll talk it through and manage it as if we were managing another injury, as if we're managing a twisted ankle or a concussion. We would add in modifications and we would ease that player back in. So it's exactly the same. And I think sometimes as coaches, we can think, a player comes to us and says that she's pregnant. We think, well, that's it. I've lost the player for like 9, 10, 11 months now. You know, they'll go through the pregnancy and then there'll be a time after pregnancy where they won't want to come back. Pregnancy is not like a death sentence. You are going to see this player again. And what's most important is that we make them aware that there are modifications in training so that they can still be active as long as it's with the approval of the midwife and they're completely comfortable. Or even if they just want to come and stand on the sidelines for a couple of months after or during their pregnancy, wrap up warm, give them something to do. If they know the game well enough, have them coach some of the newbies in some skill activities and get them engaged and involved and just keep them there and keep them active within that support network.
Yeah. It does speak to developing players, younger players, and making sure that pipeline's coming through because my wife with our first child, she was playing in a very strong women's side, and it was an older. The group had kind of come through probably 8 years of playing, and they were getting to the stage where they were in their early 30s, and in one season, my wife and 7 other players got pregnant, and overnight that team became a very experienced team to a very novice team that was desperate for players. So it's something to think about, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think, particularly as women's rugby becomes more professional, I think we definitely have to address that. And I was speaking to a player who plays for Saracens, who was also a midwife. And one of the things that she spoke about in the article is that actually community clubs could lead the way on making rugby a little bit more pregnancy friendly. So is there an area of the clubhouse where we could have a little creche or a little something where a player come in and enjoy a non-alcoholic drink or just sit and chat with their friends after training? Actually, could they put their child down knowing that their child is safe in that environment and there's a couple of toys there, it's donated or whatever? Or could the physio room, if the woman needs to breastfeed, is she comfortable enough, or can we make her aware that she can go to the physio room, she can breastfeed or pump somewhere in private? And I really do believe that the more we talk about this at a community level, actually will have impact for the top of the game as well, because it is a concern, I believe, for professional players. What happens, because it's your career and you're basically out for a long amount of time. So how do they manage that? I think by affecting change at sort of grassroots level will put pressure on the top a little bit more to sort themselves out with that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And the other one I was gonna discuss, we kind of touched on it earlier, but one of the issues talked about supporting and increasing the number of women coaches in all settings. What were some of the big takeaways from that article?
I think one of the things I certainly like to speak about doing, and we ought to do a little bit more at the magazine, for sure, and it might be something we look at doing, is making sure that other female coaches know there's a community of female coaches out there and connecting them together so that they can chat about common issues that they're having. Because there are issues out there, of course. I'm assumed to be the physio or a parent on a daily basis as opposed to the coach. A couple of months ago now, it was believable that I, as a 30-year-old, had an 18-year-old son first, rather than I was a coach of a local team here, which was, an unusual experience for me. I have to say, when I said the look on his face, I was like, no, I'm a coach. And he went, oh, all right, oh, great. And off he sort of went. And I was like, yeah.
Hopefully he realized he was an idiot.
Hopefully. But we're assumed to be physios and kind of anything other than coaches. So I think making sure that whatever constituent body, governing body, and us as a magazine, and what we'll probably look to do is make sure that we know there's a community of female coaches out there, and how can we network and support each other, because it can be quite an isolating experience sometimes. If you're the only female at your club. I'm lucky at my club. There are female managers. Our age grade manager is a woman, and she's absolutely fantastic. And she just goes in there and bulldozes through things and gets jobs done. So her being there before me kind of made my life a little easier, because it was already a little bit accepted to see a woman getting a job done in a rugby environment. But it can be really daunting. So I think my advice for any female coach out there is to connect with other female coaches. They do exist. They are on social media a lot, and just connect and chat with them, because it is an intensely reassuring experience. I know whenever I have issues, or there's a sticky bit in my learning or my level 3 experience, I'll drop one of those female coaches a message, and we'll just chat things through. And it's really beneficial.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. And I think mentoring is, you always hear that in various podcasts or on LinkedIn or something. Get yourself a coach mentor. It's like, okay, that's great. That's great advice. But actually having some kind of structure or setup in place where you can be in that environment is a lot better than just saying go and get a mentor. Yeah,
and it can be a struggle, can't it? Go and get a mentor. Well, firstly, how do I go about that? And what if I connect with somebody and 2 months down the line we have like a major disagreement, and and suddenly the mentor relationship isn't working out? How do we go about? Do we contract that? How do we recontract that? My advice would be to just drop as many people as a message as possible. I'm quite a pest on that regards. I'm on WhatsApp and I'm on Twitter, and I'm always dropping people messages. What do you think about this? Or how we chat about that problem last week. How did it go? What do you think about it? It's just sometimes really good to just have a sounding board. And there's no rule that says you have to have one person and one mentor that you speak to about all your issues. Chat to as many different people as you possibly can.
No, great point, great advice. All right, one of your roles along with the magazine is head of women's and girls rugby at Huddersfield. Can you talk about that role a little bit, especially the challenge of launching a program in the middle of a global pandemic? How did that go?
Yeah, it seems like a really stupid idea with hindsight now, doesn't it? Because we had our first taster session on the eve of one of the lockdowns.
Oh no!
And we decided to go ahead. So
right on.
The UK government were like, we're going to lock down on such and such a date. And I was like, the night before, I'm like, we're just going to run that taster session and we're just going to go ahead with it. And we had about 10 to 12 women down on,
That's great.
on the eve of a lockdown, which I was like, I'll take whatever numbers.
Yeah.
It has been a challenge. It has been an immense challenge. And I said, when I was launching the team for this club, I said, I'll coach whoever rocks up. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we're trying to grow women and girls rugby at this club. I said, I will coach whoever rocks up. If we have one person at training, they'll get a session. They may not get like the full hour and a half. We may just cut it short, but they will get something. They will get some time chatting about rugby and doing some rugby skills. Or whether it's 1 or 20, everyone will get some form of a session. And that's the kind of ethos that I've stuck to. And it's meant that we are growing steadily, but we are growing strong. And we've got kind of a blend of women now. Some want to play full contact rugby, some want to play touch rugby, and some are joining us and dropping messages about just wanting to do the social fitness stuff.
Right.
And one of the things that I've made clear is whatever level you want to join us for, so contact, touch, or social fitness, it is completely open to you. So I think sometimes if you're a woman who's wanting to try out rugby, but you think contact rugby, or you're a little bit unsure of that, you think, oh, am I going to be pressured into playing 15-a-side contact rugby with all the scrums and all the breakdowns and everything else? Well, no, because again, just like the pregnancy story we covered, there are modifications, or it's not even modifications, it's levels. So if you want to join at the social fitness level, absolutely come along, have fun. There's generally free food after and a bit of a cake once a month. Like, come along, run about, meet some new people. If you want to join touch rugby, we're looking to host a touch festival at our club, which has invited local teams down to just come around and kick a ball around and just get involved and play some touch rugby fixtures. And then if you're wanting the contact games, awesome, because contact rugby is there also as well, and you can learn how to tackle and learn how to scrummage and get stuck in. So we're kind of, the way I pitched it was offering all levels for everybody and trying to make it as inclusive as possible, and just trying to get people picking up a rugby ball and chucking it about on a Tuesday evening.
Yeah, it sounds like a really clear strategy from you and the club of trying to increase numbers and engagement at both junior and senior levels. In a bit more detail, like if someone listening to this was coaching a women's club team and they really want to, use some methods that you've used to increase numbers, what would you say would be some of the big ones for them?
I think being really clear on social media is absolutely important, because if we're honest with ourselves, that's where a lot of people will first encounter us. Or you'll go on your phone, even if you're just scrolling through Facebook or Twitter, you might come across a rugby team, or if you're going out there specifically to look for some kind of social fitness to join into, social media is the first kind of way that you greet potential players. So being really clear on messaging. So I found that being really clear on the fact that we offer those different levels has helped immensely, and being really clear on what equipment to bring. So it might seem really obvious again to you or I, because we've been involved in rugby and we know what the world's like, we know what equipment to bring, but sometimes just stating that you don't need any equipment, all you need are, I usually say, a water bottle, some outdoor fitness clothes, and a pair of trainers you don't mind getting muddy. Like, you don't even need studded boots to rock up and try your first session. So sometimes stating the absolute obvious can really reassure people and actually make them step out the door, because the hardest thing is getting them to step out the door and come along in the first place to a brand new environment where they think it's going to be filled with men. They think it's going to be like blokes in suits propped up at the bar, and sometimes it is, but that can be really daunting.
Yeah.
So actually getting them and convince them to put some shoes on and step out the house is the hardest thing, and the way to reaching that is being really reassuring and reaching them on social media.
No, that's great advice. All right, we always wrap up the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up, you mentioned the Leicester Tigers, so I'm predicting an answer here maybe. Who was one of the players that you really liked what they did and how they played the game that got you into the game a bit more?
This is probably going to shed some insight, perhaps, or cast me in a bad light of how I played when I was a player. But one of my favourite players at Tigers was Martin Johnson, who was gritty, knew how to play in the forwards, was powerful, and then I always admired the way he could often start a fight and then smile walking away from it. Was probably one of the highlights for me.
Yeah, no, he was pretty good, that's for sure. And what about now? Who are some of the players that you admire and like what they're doing?
If I can go really stereotypical again, I do admire the work rate and the scrummaging of Dan Cole at Tigers. And I think particularly, this is going to sound like a broken record for anybody that follows me on Twitter, but he has made like vast improvements to his game this year, and he looks insanely powerful. It's a joy to watch anybody in the front row for me when you can see that they're really honing their craft and they've got a dedication to it. And I love to watch the upfront battles, to be honest. Anytime him and Marla go toe to toe in a scrum is a pretty amazing day for me.
Yeah, and there'll probably be some amazing stuff on Twitter coming out afterwards from Marla about it as well.
Yeah, and I love all that stuff. I love an environment and I love Marla's crazy tracksuits, and I love the fact that Quinn's just kind of getting off the Tigers, fan bus for a while. I love the fact that Quinn's appears to be that kind of environment where they allow a player to be themselves. So he can rock up in those fancy tracksuits that I would probably wear rocking about the house, because I think they're quite fashionable. But I love the fact that he feels it's free enough of environment for him to be himself. Yeah,
I think that's important. There's a lot of miserable looking professional rugby players and coaches floating around, and if it can, be a bit freer and a bit more loose within boundaries, I think that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the more you create a relaxed and comfortable environment, the freer the players are to speak their mind, to try ideas, and a happy player means they're going to be happy on the pitch and off the pitch, which is the priority. Happy players play well.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. All right. Third question. What about coaches? Who's a high profile coach that you like what they're doing?
Simon Middleton, obviously, is probably a stereotypical answer
Mhm.
from me. Who's England women's head coach and was
Yep.
coach of the year. But I've also had the pleasure to have a couple of WhatsApp chats with him and phone calls with him, which has been an
Right.
absolute joy. And he is not just an incredibly talented coach, but he's also amazing to just speak to about coaching craft, and really supportive of your coaching journey, learning journey. And it was a joy I nipped down to an England training session as kind of an RFU rewards day, and it was a privilege to watch him coach and just how he is there and is impactful, but also enables his assistant coaches to go and perform their job, and the level of trust that's required there. When you're coaching, the best women's side in the world, probably the temptation is to want to control everything because you've got to maintain and be the best. But actually, there was a level of trust there that enabled that. I trust you as an assistant coach, go and do your job. I trust you as an assistant coach, go and do your job. And it probably comes back again to that happy environment we were talking about. There needs to be a trust in there in order for the environment to be supportive and for it to be a winning environment.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, and final question: who's someone in the grassroots in a coaching setting that you think's doing good work and needs some recognition?
Oh, that is. I'm probably going to be really obvious with my answer if you follow me on Twitter, but I have what I call is my coaching bestie, who's a guy called Andy Stevens. He's a coach down south. We met during the pandemic. I say met. We connected on a podcast we were doing for Rugby Coach Weekly. We haven't actually met in person yet. I don't even think we've video called, but he's fast become my coaching bestie because he does amazing work at a college where he coaches. He coaches in the women and girls game, and he's a great advocate of that. But he's equally just become like a really good sounding board for me, and we share and swap ideas back and forth. And he's great for sort of peer-to-peer feedback, which I think is so important sometimes as a coach. I think when we say mentors, we often think of somebody that's like above you, that's like been there and is climbed the ladder and is higher up, but actually it's equally important to have peer-to-peer feedback, because we do that sometimes as a coach. We create the opportunities for players to have peer-to-peer feedback. I think we need to always make sure we're creating peer-to-peer feedback for ourselves as well.
All right, that's a great point and good way to sign things off. All right, Jess, well, it's been awesome having you on the show. I've really enjoyed discussing women's rugby and the work you're doing with the Women's Rugby Coaching magazine and at Huddersfield. So I want to say thank you very much for sharing your knowledge in this area, and great to chat.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I've loved every minute of it. It's great to chat about how the magazine started, especially as we're coming up to the first anniversary. It's been good to reflect on some of those really important stories.
Awesome. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.